And when I'm in my stressed out situation, I move to 3. And when I'm in my relaxed situation, I move to 9, right? And the underlying, and I'll back out a little bit, so even though there's 9 types, you can also think of it as 3 groups of 3. And there's an underlying motivator for each one of these groups of 3.
Yeah.
And so the driver for the 8, the 9, and the 1 is anger. And the driver for the 5, the 6, and the 7 is anxiety. And the driver for the 2, 3, and 4 is feelings. So you have these 3 drivers, and then as we move into situations, those drivers will induce us to respond in certain ways.
Some of you will have been long-term listeners and will be aware that I've started this podcast on a product called Anchor. So when I started, I was working on how do I do it? What do I need to do to get a podcast out there? All these different things. How do I actually get it out into different podcasting areas? And how do I potentially make some money out of podcasting? And I discovered Anchor. And the answer to every one of my questions really was simple, and it was Anchor. Anchor provides a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distribution your podcast if you're interested in doing one. Best of all, it's free. It's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. I can do it on my phone. I can do it on the laptop. It's fab. And now Anchor can match with great sponsors who can advertise on the podcast and hopefully support and pay for some of the stuff that's going on. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing by reading this ad. Anchor will pay me for doing this advert. So the way I use Anchor, and a recent thing that I've started to experiment with, is using the contributor section where someone rings in and leaves a message. You'll have heard earlier on maybe one of my podcasts, people's contributions and questions and queries and thanks. So it's a great way of using it, really. Over the time, I've recorded directly into the app. I've recorded and uploaded. I've recorded on my phone and uploaded at the same time. So it's really flexible. It's for you to do it when you want, where you want, and however you want. So if you've wanted to start a podcast and make some money out of it, why not go to anchor.fm/start. That's anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using it. Okay, I can't wait to hear it. So today I'd love to welcome to the show Matt Schlegel. Matt is committed to developing highly effective style diverse teams and giving them tools and strategies to tackle challenges that are seemingly impossible. Principal of Schlegel Consulting, Matt started his career as an electrical engineer and soon realized that successful project outcomes depend on more on leading people than leading electrons. Matt discovered a powerful system called Enneagram. I knew I'd murder that again, even though I said it once before, and used it to develop a novel set of tools, strategies, and applications for team effectiveness that he uses in his consulting practice and shares in his book, as you can see on the screen if you're watching, Teamwork 9.0. So Matt, welcome. Apologies for crucifying your name and for crucifying your tool that you use. Tell us a bit about you.
Well, we're starting off. I'm feeling very crucified. No, thank you so much, Nigel, for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about this.
Brilliant. Well, tell us a little bit about you, a bit more richer background. Where are you? I think from your accent, people will probably be able to guess the country that you're from.
Yes. And the state is California, and I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. Nice. And where I was, pretty much born and raised, stayed in California for college, did end up going to and lived in Japan for 3 years before returning back to California. And have been here ever since. Wife 3 kids, living the dream.
Brilliant, brilliant. I'd love to talk to you about Tokyo as well, maybe later. Not
Yeah.
Tokyo, about Japan. It's
Yeah.
on my bucket list. That's the top of my bucket list has always been there to head over to Japan.
It's fascinating place.
Yeah, brilliant. So, obviously, tell us a little bit about how you got into what you're doing. Obviously, you mentioned that you were an electrical engineer, and then you've gone into team. How did that come about? How did that all?
Right. So I was just going along in my career as an electrical engineer, and at some point, my boss came to me and said, "Hey, I would like you to lead a team on a project." And I'm like, "I know nothing about leading people." And he said, "Don't worry, you'll be fine." Pardon me?
It's an unusual story, that.
Yeah. And I wasn't fine. I tend to worry, and I was like, well, I'm not prepared to lead people. So I just started studying, books on leadership and teamwork and learning different tools. And, and I took it very seriously because I wanted to do a good job at it. And by the time I came across this tool called the Enneagram, I'd already been familiarized with, Myers-Briggs, DISC, Strength Finders. There's a bunch of, teamwork tools that are commonly used. And my engineering brain, it always approaches these things with a lot of skepticism. And, I kind of take them apart and put them back together and just see, what's good about them and what's not good about them. And when I started to do that with the Enneagram, I just became more and more fascinated with it because the more I took it apart, the deeper it wanted to take me. And I found that it was much better at helping me understand team dynamics, on my team, the relationships between people on the team and the types of conflicts that happen between the different people. The Enneagram really shed a lot of light on it. And so as I used it more and became more fascinated with it, I started to ask other questions. It's like, why is the Enneagram numbers? Not letters or colors or animal names or, and it turns out there's a reason for that. It is, it tells an order. So there's an order 1 through 9 of how people work together to solve problems. So the Enneagram isn't just this personality system as it's commonly known. It's also a human problem-solving system. And, I discovered this about it by reading these old texts about using it in that way. And I'm like, nobody knows about this. And that's what compelled me to write my book. It's not a book about the Enneagram per se. There's a lot of books about the Enneagram. My book focuses on how do you take this tool and apply it to getting teams to move through this process to solve big, challenging problems. And I did that with my team at work, and it was so successful that I decided to just break out and start a consulting practice around it. And I've been doing that for about 15 years now, and ended up writing the book just to, explain that aspect of the Enneagram and then share, some fun anecdotes of all the different, team dynamics I've seen along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned DISC and Myers-Briggs, and there's Belbin, and I had I've had someone talking on DISC, and I'm a big fan of DISC, love of DISC, because it's very simple, and that's quite good for me. I need simple. And looking at the other one with I had Ruth Pierce on talking about positive personality profiles as well. Not positive. Sorry, forgive me, Ruth. I've forgotten the name of your book. Anyway, but it's the one. It's again about. You mentioned it a minute ago. I'm going to
Myers-Briggs.
No, I'll remember it in a minute. It'll be okay.
Strength Finders.
It's the strengths.
It's the
Yeah.
positive strengths, it's project strengths and things
Oh,
like
okay.
that, and using those for teams. And I find that whole area from when I was 18, 16, 17, 18, doing organization and the environment and environmental for as part of my business studies, we did motivation and went back to the Hertzberg and all those guys, and all from get go on that, I went, that's really fascinating. Understand why people do what they do,
Yeah.
and how you as a person interfacing with them has always been something that just absolutely fascinates me.
Yeah.
I just find every time I look at it, and it's kind of, and I talk about DISC with friends and colleagues, and kind of say, well, you've got two ends of those spectrums, and we'll get into some details in this, maybe compare and contrast some of these things. The fact that it's really good to find out why someone thinks you're a dickhead, because they're at that opposite end, and then you realize, and that's why you'd think they're that way, and then you just go, the penny drops, doesn't it? And you go,
Right.
that's why I'm always at odds with this person.
Right.
It's not because of them, it's not because of me, it's because of that combination of us.
Right.
And
exactly.
and
exactly.
all
And then
of
once you understand that and you realize what's going on there, you can rise above it.
yeah, you can adapt, can't you? And you can,
Right.
because the only thing I think the thing, there's, I'm sure you've heard of it, there's a podcast called Manager Tools, and the way they talk about it is the fact that you can't change someone else's behavior. The only thing you can change is yours and how your reactions, isn't it? It's someone pokes you with an umbrella, you decide to get angry. They didn't make you angry. And it's the same. If someone sends you a snotty email in a style that doesn't fit with your character, you decide to get angry. It isn't them. Or you can decide not to.
Right.
And step back, or get angry and then step back, think, count to 10, and then go back in. And
Right.
and it's how we do that. And it's hard to do. It's very hard to do, I find.
Yeah, there's I read a book, I think it was called Whole Brain Living by Jill Bolt Taylor. And in it, she talked about the 90-second rule. In other words, when you have that reaction, you read that email that, that provokes some reaction in you. She says that the chemicals in your brain that are released, they only persist for 90 seconds. And the only reason why they persist for longer than 90 seconds is you keep thinking about it. If you keep thinking about it, you just keep resetting that 90 seconds. But if you actually give yourself a timeout to stand up, walk away, listen to some music, go have a conversation with somebody else, within 90 seconds, those chemicals in your brain will dissipate and you'll be back in your provoked state.
Yeah, so it's like that whole thing where people advise that, right, if you're going to write an email when you're angry, fine, write it, get it out your system, leave it. The following day, you then read it, and how many times you do that, and you go, I can't. You wouldn't send that email. That's the one.
But it feels so good to write it.
Yeah. Gets all of that out without getting out. It's like you say, you're not choosing to react to the person. You're deflecting away from that person, aren't you? And kind of, just as you say, this is what I would have said had I not been someone who wanted to mix with other adults at the same time. And that's kind of what it is. And it's a choice between being able to mix with other people by not saying exactly what you think immediately, because that can sometimes we all do it though, so I suppose it's quite interesting when that happens.
Yes indeed.
So talk us through about how I'm going to get the name right, an enneagram,
yeah,
enneagram, right? I'm going to kind of put it in my head, how that works and what it is, and just a little bit of outline about that, because I'll be frank, when we spoke about this, and it's the first time I'd ever heard of it.
Okay.
It's one that's not ever bubbled up to my radar, and I'm sure that's common of a lot of these type of tools.
Yeah.
Some of the ones I've talked to people about, and they're sitting on not got a clue what I'm talking about either. So it's kind of it's interesting. It doesn't. Not all of them are known by everyone. So talk us a little bit around the background.
Yeah. Just at a high level. It's it talks about, so Ennea in Greek means 9.
Right.
And so it's 9 types. And if you see the symbol for the diagram of the Enneagram, it's a circle with 9 numbers around it and a bunch of lines connecting the numbers in between. And and one of the great things about the Enneagram, and you've already mentioned this, is that it really speaks to underlying motivation.
Right.
And it also speaks to these responses that we're going to have. Are we going to respond with anger? Are we going to respond with anxiety? Are we going to respond with more of a grief or shame response? So it speaks to those responses as well. And one of the things I really like about the Enneagram, as opposed to some of these other systems, is that it speaks to dynamics, because our behaviors change depending on how we're feeling, and if we're relaxed and calm versus we're up against a deadline and stressed out. We're going to behave in different ways, and the Enneagram actually tells us, and those are what those lines are in the middle. There's the lines of stress or security, and as you move towards stress, you are going to behave more like one type, and when you're in security, you're going to behave another type. So, like for instance, my core type is type 6. And when I'm in my stressed out situation, I move to 3. And when I'm in my relaxed situation, I move to 9, right? And the underlying, and I'll back out a little bit, so even though there's 9 types, you can also think of it as 3 groups of 3. And there's an underlying motivator for each one of these groups of 3.
Yeah.
And so the driver for the 8, the 9, and the 1 is anger. And the driver for the 5, the 6, and the 7 is anxiety. And the driver for the 2, 3, and 4 is feelings. So you have these 3 drivers, and then as we move into situations, those drivers will induce us to respond in certain ways.
Yeah.
And then it speaks to that underlying motivation. So, for instance, let's take type 1. Type 1 is in that anger group, and they're called the internal anger. So, and there's three states. You can have external anger, internal anger, or suppressed anger.
Yep.
And the internal anger, the 1, has this angry voice in their head saying, that's not right. It shouldn't be like that. It should be like this. And you need to work hard to make sure that you fix it and make it like this. And that's what your brain is just constantly telling you. And that speaks to that underlying motivation of the type that's often called the perfectionist, because they just drive to get all the details exactly right. So, each one of these types has, a different but unique underlying motivator that speaks to what's going on in their life and why they're behaving and responding in certain ways. And and I was saying I'm a type 6, so I'm in the anxiety group. And the way I'm suppressed anxiety, so I'm in the center of that anxiety group. And the way I keep my anxiety down is, if I know what's going to happen, my anxiety goes away. As soon as it's like things aren't going as planned and things are getting chaotic, then I can feel my anxiety come up. And when my anxiety comes up, then what I do is I start working harder and harder and harder to check off and tick off all the things on the list that I need to do. And then when I tick them all off, then my anxiety goes back down again.
It's that level of
And
control,
so,
isn't it?
yes. And so that makes me look, when I'm in that state, that stressed out state, my sixness makes me look like a 3. So I'm connected to the 3. And then when my anxiety dissipates and I don't have to worry about things, I'm on vacation, then my anxiety goes away, and then I look like the calm, relaxed type 9. And so that's one of the things I love about the Enneagram, is that it explains these dynamics and even our changes in behaviors depending on our stress state.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, and it kind of, yeah. I'm just obviously with me, I'm drawing parallels with the DISC model that we talk about there, and there's some commonality there in a similar sort of thinking, isn't it? In the fact that it's that what behaviors but it's more internal, isn't it? Because typically on a lot of them, it's the behaviors you exhibit rather than, but not necessarily what the internal things that are going on. And as you say there, that's kind of, I can understand that if someone who is comfortable when things are all the ship sailing fine, when it's not, sometimes you probably aim at controlling things that are uncontrollable, isn't it? And that drive to try to control the uncontrollable. And with project managers, anyone who's listening to this, that we're kind of can be like that quite often. It's that control. Sometimes you've got to not be in control in order to let things go the right way. And with a team, especially, I imagine as team leadership, I imagine in that, because that's really interesting, that the fact that you talk about the lines as well, and I'm guessing those are interactions, and where those lines, how does that work? Is it that when you've got the lines of a 9 and a 3 working together, that's where you'll get a clash? Is that the kind of thing that kind of comes out of it?
Well, there I have found the lines can speak to that as well. For instance, if you look at the Enneagram diagram, you'll see that there is a triangle in the middle, and it connects the 3, the 6, and the 9.
Right. Yeah.
And so that makes up a group of 3 that actually works very well together. And and in my book, I call these the work team triads, because I see certain groups of 3 often coming together and working together, very, very well. And so the 3 groups are the 1, the 4, and the 7, the 2, the 5, and the 8, and the 3, and the 6, and the 9. And I call them the 1, 4, and 7. I call the startup triad, because they're the ones who want to go off and do something brand new, and and maybe invent something. I see a lot of 1, 4s, and 7s in startup companies here in Silicon Valley. So that's that kind of dynamic. And then the 2, the 5, and the 8, I call them the industrious triad, because they love to come together and just get stuff done. They're just like, they're like the operations group. They just love making stuff and doing that, and they work well together to do that. And then the 3, the 6, and the 9, I call the systematizing group, because what they like to do is like create these structures where all of these things are working together very well, right? So you'll have your product development team of 1, 4s, and 7s, and you'll have your operations teams of 2, 5s, and 8s, and then you get all of this in place and get it working, and that's that role of the systematizing group.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And you find that as people move through their careers, they tend to migrate to these roles that are suitable for them. It's like,
yeah. I suppose if you're working, it's a typical thing. If you're working against your natural tendencies in another role, you might be very skilled at it, but you're not necessarily naturally fit in that. Funny, which throws me back to many years ago, 20, nearly 30 years ago, when I had a psychometric test for an interview. That way back when people used to do lots of psychometric tests Actually, it was quite a junior role that I was going for, and though really intriguing and interesting because they gave me the results, and obviously it's just, and it kind of summarized me. And at the time I was working as an accountant, and it summarized me as being highly capable in the role that he's doing, but not naturally fitted to what he was doing. And
interesting.
And it's kind of, that kind of talks to what you're saying there. If you've got someone working in that product group who's someone who's really about systemizing, they're going to want to try and put some structure around it, and maybe that's where some of the innovation tooling and innovation tools and techniques, there's been someone who's been in there and go, how can we do this just at the seat of our pants? We should put process in. So maybe they're good in some ways, but it kind of, I can see how that can happen. And from a project point of view, I see quite often people saying, right, a project manager needs to be this kind of person. And quite often I sit there looking at certain projects, and me, again, I draw from my thing. The startup of a project I enjoy. I get going. It's getting new customers, understand what we're doing, getting everything going. It's all kind of,
right.
The end of it, I can enjoy that as well, where we're all getting together, as long as it's not too stressful and we're trying to push it over the line.
Yeah.
But that bit in the middle, whilst I can understand it, I can get a little bit bored. I can get a little bit, and it's probably not, and I can be not as a spot on with it, and there's probably people better than me. And sometimes you think, if you're going to run a project and it's big enough, rather than having a project manager that runs the end-to-end project, which is what we all tend to do, you get your project, you deliver it to the end. Right. Actually, do you go, right, there's a route, we need to kick this project off, we need the 147s, get them in there, get it started, they'll work out, get the team together, started. Then we bring in the 2, 5 and 8 who have got to, they would probably come in at the end where it's like all hands to the deck, charge, push it through. And the 3, 6 and 9s are in the middle where that make sure we're hitting the mark, hitting everything as we go along. And it's kind of, but we don't structure projects like that. We go project manager A, you're doing it all the way through.
Right.
And that's where you'll see it. You can see it with different project managers, that certain parts of the process, some people I know with a beginning of a project, with the ambiguity that you get, they hate it and they really struggle because they're just trying to wrestle this thing into something completely clear. And actually, sometimes you've got to go through a period of time where you're not going to get it.
Right. Just, and that's where the 1s and the 4s and the 7s, that's where they love being. Right. So you're spot on there. It's certain, types are really drawn to certain situations and repelled, and others are repelled by those same situations. Right. And so if you can, and I talk about this in the book, I call it shared leadership. Mm-hmm. Because as you're working through the process, certain types are going to be more suited, and this is I'll tell you the punchline, right?
Wow, you made it this far. I'm guessing that you enjoyed the show if you have, or maybe you've just left it playing in the background and forgot it was on. But if you did enjoy it and you're inclined to, I'd be delighted if you could share the show with your colleagues. Discoverability with podcasts is quite difficult, especially with a niche one like this. But sharing with your colleagues and letting them have a chance to listen to these fantastic guests would be brilliant. If you've got time, a review on whatever platform you listen to it on would be great too, especially if it's a 5-star one. Again, that makes it easier for people to discover the show when they're searching on there, because the comments raise it up the old search engine optimization on all the different tools. If you are feeling flush, I have a couple of ways you could contribute. One is Patreon, Patreon/Sunday Lunch PM, and you can donate some money to the podcast that way, or you can jump along to my website, nigelcreaser.com, www.nigelcreaser.com, and click on the link to the shop, and in there you've got all my books that I've created in the varying different guises, a number of different ways you can grab a copy of those. And down the bottom I've got my guests' books, so everyone who's been on here, if they've had a book, I've got a link to their book in there, and Amazon give me a little bit back for when someone buys from them. But more importantly, if you come back next time and listen, I'll be delighted. So I'll leave you alone and let you get on with your day now. Thank you. Bye. Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser, and it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye.
On the 5th day of the project, my sponsor gave to me 4 calling clients, 3 full sprints, 2 backlog items, and a fictional benefits case. On the 6th day of the project, my sponsor gave to me 6 scopes of creeping, 4 calling clients, 3 full sprints, 2 backlog items, and a fictional benefits case.